people associate these foreigners, right? Foreigners with criminal activity, with drugs. Like, it's so bad that people will tell you, yeah, the Nigerians do this, the Somalis do that, and the Mozambicans, oh, they kill people.
We have seen situations and circumstances where also people from South Africa, people who are South Africans, have been attacked because they have been packed in the same category of being foreigners, and which is attached to being criminals and all of that.
We call foreigners people from Somalia, Pakistani, and the rest of Nigeria. We call them foreigners. But if we go to an aspect of white people, we don't call them foreigners.
When you talk about Abraham, the first people that must leave are your white people.
Africans on Africa, let's go.
Welcome to the second episode of Africans on Africa podcast. My name is Munashe Katsere, and I am an African. And today I'm so excited to be joined on the podcast by a friend, a colleague, and a researcher and anthropologist that I respect both in the work that he does, but also because a lot of the conversations that I have with this guy just turns into podcasts within of themselves. And the way he thinks and the way he interacts with content is something that is beautifully arranged. But also, this is one of the people that has been helping and working in the background for the podcast and making sure that everything is set out. But most importantly, he's been using his research skills to go into the field and talk to people and make sure that we have data and research that ascertains that everything that we talk about on the podcast, it's not only our opinions, but we also talk to the people on the ground and make sure that we have the opinions of the people on the ground as we move with the information that we talk about on the podcast. I want to introduce everyone to Thabiso Legodi, my friend, colleague, and one of the best researchers that I have encountered. Thabiso, welcome to the podcast, and can you believe we've made it to episode 2?
Hey, thanks. And yeah, man, well done to the entire team. But also, just thank you to everybody who's been checking out the episodes. I know episode 1 actually landed quite in a very interesting manner. Just looking at the comments,
Yeah.
You've got people who are saying what the hell, and then you've got people who are going, "Hey, I'm part of the diaspora. I actually want to engage in this conversation."
Yeah.
And then there's people who are saying, "Yeah, but if we're talking about Africans getting along, why is it South Africa's job?"
Yeah.
Very interesting.
As everybody can see, we actually actively engage with the comments, and we actually have moments of talking with Thabiso to say, dude, this is the comment that we received. How do we make sure that we also respond to the comments in an engaging manner? And I'm so excited to see that we had so much engagement from people. Specifically, one of the things that really struck me was the fact that 63% of our engagement, Thabiso, you wouldn't believe this, it's coming from Kenya, and Kenya is leading in terms of our engagement as of YouTube. But also, we are going to use this episode to I think we are having the reach that we aimed for in terms of encompassing Africa. That's how I took it, because it's an African conversation, and I think the moment that we see that the people that we are talking to are not only within our vicinity is something that I saw as a positive mark of something that we are doing. But if you are in Kenya and you want to tell us maybe what makes you engage with the podcast and what we are doing right and what we are doing wrong, we are really excited to be engaging with everybody and seeing what we could do better as well. But I'm excited to see that we are touching all parts of Africa and everybody is engaged in that regard. As Thabiso also stated, you can proceed.
Just for context, for those who don't know, we're both in South Africa, so that's why we're talking about this.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like you said, Thabiso, at the end of this episode, we're going to engage with some of the comments that we received. We're going to try to touch on a lot of the comments that we received. So please make sure that you follow us on Africans on Africa, on YouTube, on TikTok, and also, apart from watching the content, make sure that you also comment and actively engage on the comment on the conversation, because we want to be actively engaged with you. And this is the point of the podcast, Thabiso, right? We want to engage with people, and we want to open up the floor to conversations that are not had in daily lives, but that are essential to people that are around Africa. So to kick off things, Thabiso, I asked a question on the last episode, and you probably might have seen this as well. And just to contextualize as well what we have been doing behind the scenes, we, like I stated before, we have been going into the field and talking to people with regards to what we are saying. Is it correct? Is it relatable to people? And is it even the situation that is on the ground? So, and you did amazing work with that as well, with regards to the research that you did, which we're going to use within this episode as well. So I guess three things that I want us to talk about within this episode is the social impact of what we have been talking about, the political impact and effect of what we have been talking about, and also what has been happening online. I think those are the three things that we want to be focusing on. But I'll throw the question to you as well. This is my perception and this is my experience. And the question is, why is it as Africans we cannot get along, or we are not getting along as Africans?
Yeah, I think that the premise of the question is actually a bit tricky for me, because when I think of like Africans getting along, it's not that binary in my head, right? It's not as simple as Africans should be getting along, Africans are not getting along. You know, like we're talking about a bunch of kids at the playground. Instead, what the reality is a tension between like the mainstream or majority of people who see themselves as Africans, and I'm talking about like your working class people, right? I'm talking about your ordinary regular person, and how they engage with others, be it on terms of race or class. There's that's one dynamic. Then there's a dynamic of like your middle class, perhaps upper middle class Africans, and that social reality is so different, right? These are the people who chill together at the lounges in the airport, right? There's no such thing as not getting along in that arena, man. We're making money, let's go. You know what I mean? And even in the diaspora, that reflects itself in a similar fashion. So when we're saying Africans are not getting along, I think the premise is basically on the first, I can say group, on the first group of like these people who get on Twitter and Facebook and all these things who keep saying, yeah, Nigerians are like this, yeah, South Africans are like this, yeah, Kenyans did this and that. I think we run the risk of getting stuck in that, whereas like African and being African is so large and broad, you know. Yet at the same time, I know there's that reality of people are getting beaten up somewhere for their nationality, you know, but only if they are like from another African country, not if they're like from France or Malta or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So there's that reality.
So you are the only person who gives the example of Malta as a country where people are coming from, but I get what you're saying. I think just also to bring context.
By the way, I'm only bringing up Malta because I was reading about it. I know like there's a lot of corruption that goes on in Africa, and the companies are registered in Malta, but they run by people in Africa.
I was just like, Malta, how did you get here? But just to contextualize what I'm saying as well, and the way the question came from, I think is part of two things that you mentioned: the fact that you use the word others, but also the fact that a lot of interactions that we have as Africans, they lead into clashes more than conversations, right? So we at most times we don't engage, but we choose to disengage with other Africans. I can give an example of and obviously I'm giving examples of spaces that I've occupied and done research on and read on. There are people that are migrants in South Africa or foreigners in South Africa, if we are using Africans as the word that determines if we're using foreigners as the word that determines Africans as foreigners, and they are afraid of actually walking in South Africa, or they are afraid of actually answering their phone in a taxi because they might be attacked as a result. But also I've had research and I've seen research where people, and I've done research where children are translating for their parents, you know, just because if their parents, they can speak English, But if their parents cannot speak an African language, they might be attacked as a result. And the violence that happens as a result of that is so profound that it's a daily reality for people. So for me, the aspect of being attacked is not something that happens on a large scale, like when it happens and then they say there are xenophobic attacks, so to speak. It's a daily reality for people who are described as foreigners. Those are the people as well who are described as others in Africa. So for me, that's why it is important to ask the question, why is it an African cannot feel safe in African spaces? Why is it an African cannot connect with their own African neighbor and have a civil conversation and open conversation? It's not only within South Africa, it's also in other countries where we see that people are attacking each other as Africans and they're not having a good relationship and a good bond as Africans. So that's my departure point in terms of why is it we can't get along, because if you look at the departure lounge, in a lot of cases we don't even engage, or those who are there, they don't. So I'm specifically looking at this other who is not engaged with, but in moments where they are engaged with, it becomes volatile.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can give you my personal point of view, and I think my personal point of view and experience versus the research that I've done, having spoken to people on the ground and read on this, do have a little bit of a tension between the two, right? So when you start talking to people, they let's say South Africans, for example, I'll use that example. When I'm home, I'm in South Africa, right? I can get away with being me quite a lot, right? Versus a friend who is Somali or Tanzanian, right? Down the road, I can get with quite a lot of being myself, right? And I know it does get to instances where, I remember when I was in varsity using taxis, I remember this one dude was trying to, he was on the phone with his mother. I could tell he was on the phone with his mother, and we were in Arcadia, I think, heading to Sunnyside in Pretoria, and he was trying to ask his mom, "Are you at home?" on the phone, right? He's got that thick, I think, Igbo accent, right? And he says out loud, "Are you at home?" right? And the taxi driver freaks out. He's like, "Yeah, are you at the go?" And he's trying to stop. He can't figure out where that street is, and everybody in the taxi just burst out laughing, right? And I remember thinking, man, that must be so difficult for that guy to just get along and travel with public transport, and it goes to what you're saying about it being a daily reality, right? So there's that side of it. But then at the same time, I'm thinking, there's a reason. I mean, we can't dismiss this. There's a reason why people dislike or hate other people, right? It might be unfounded, right? It might be unfounded, but there's always a reason, right? It might be, well, maybe unfounded is the wrong word. It might be unjustified, right? But there's always a reason, people. So the typical one that we deal with around here is crime, right? People associate these foreigners, right? Foreigners with criminal activity, with drugs. It's so bad that people will tell you, yeah, the Nigerians do this, the Somalis do that, and the Mozambicans, they kill people, etc., and obviously, we're stereotyping at that point, right? We're stereotyping. That's not. It's not like every Mozambican is a particular way, or every South African is a particular way. But when you're living in townships, bro, it's so difficult to get away from it. And it's so difficult to get your mind to think differently when you're surrounded by family, church, even, of people who keep saying the same thing about foreign nationals. So
I'm glad that you took it there, because I think there is something powerful with stereotyping, right? And that's what happens in South Africa as well. I can give an example of a stereotype that has found life in in the South African context. So just to also make sure that we are on the same page with everyone. So a stereotype is a generalization, right? And this generalization in a lot of cases is based off lack of evidence, right? So I'll give a pretty much an example of a stereotype that has taken a life of its own, which is all women are bad drivers, right? How many times have people spoken and said, let's say you're driving, right? And then someone does something on the road, and then someone says, "Oh, I bet that's a woman," right? Or they, without even looking, they say, "Hey, these women are bad drivers," right? But also to add context to that, how many times has it happened that you're driving and someone makes a mistake, and then you say, "I bet that's a woman," and then it becomes a woman who's driving, right? We have the chances of it being a woman are actually larger than we can think, right? But think of it this way: it, in a sense, almost validates that stereotype, or that stereotype now finds life because it almost has been verified. But this is how I look at it. I think the stereotypes are and foreigners in a lot of countries are generalized to be the problems, right? Donald Trump said it. Other countries are struggling with the same thing. Europe has been taking their problems to Rwanda as a solution rather than, keeping them in Europe. And they are viewed as a problem. They are viewed as a nuisance. They are always viewed as someone who is unwanted within that society, right? But it's like everything that is done, even if it's not a foreigner, right, who has done it, it's tagged with the label or connotations of foreignhood. I can give an example of a shooting that happened recently, and the first thing that came out is foreignhood, or a nationality that came out, and it actually was found that it wasn't a person who's a foreigner who committed that crime. So this is what I'm saying, and this is how I think about it. Stereotypes only find life in terms of fulfillment when they are attached with some sort of prejudice, and it turns into discrimination because there is that aspect that's found within the prejudice. There is evidence, right? An example is all Nigerians are drug dealers, right? It's sitting and simmering in a person, right? They've heard it from church, they've heard it from people, but now a politician says these Nigerians are drug dealers, right? This is a person who's in authority, and the stereotype finds life because someone who's in authority has said this, and it almost affirms it, or it almost confirms or validates what this person has been thinking. And from then, that's the connection that is made to acting on those stereotypes, now discriminating people, attacking people, and all of that. But I know that you went and did research on that, and you went into the field to talk to people about this, because personally, I spoke to people who were like conflicted about it, because some of them were like, wait, what is this thing called Abahambi? What is this thing called foreigners must go? And some of them were like, they must go, but we must not attack them. So maybe let's take it to that aspect of the social aspect.
Before I jump into that, do you see, from what you're saying, do you see how overwhelming it is for like a regular person to deal with that stereotype, even internalized prejudice, when your reality is basically that, like whether that's church, that's family, or you turn on the television and you're watching, what's that show where they fight drug dealers?
Soktoala.
And there's a Nigerian guy that shows up. It starts reaffirming and confirming. We all have a confirmation bias anyway, right? Now think of that for a regular for the layman, and now we're asking you to investigate the way you're thinking and try to put yourself in another person's shoe, right? We're asking you all of this when the place where you live is like drug infested and there's crime and all things like that. I think it's quite a stretch to try and get someone to come out of that and go, actually, let's be a little bit more critical about this, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying like people are simple-minded or anything like that. No, I'm saying people's reality is very simple. I'm doing well or I'm not doing well. Right? All the nuance that we're talking about right now makes it quite academic. For the regular person, It's pretty simple. And that's what I'm thinking about when you reference the idea of like abahambe, right? And the tension that comes up from the ground, from talking to people on the streets. I mean, I talked to a couple of people, and one of the main things that drew my attention was the following. Young people, young South Africans, young black South Africans will talk to you about how, yes, we do have a problem of criminals, of foreign national criminals, and they'll tell you all sorts of things about how, you know, these people don't have IDs, these people are thus, you know, prone to crime because it's easy for them to get away with it. They give you examples. Ananias Mate was a big one, you know, and they'll say, yeah, it's everywhere. But then, once you start probing and speak further with them about like their actual lived reality, people will be honest. Look, man, I got a couple of Mozambican friends. They cool dudes. My hairstylist is Nigerian, Lokanae, and he's a cool dude, right? The guy I buy my weed from is from Malawi. He's a cool dude. Right? They'll tell you all sorts of things. And that's where this tension comes up of, I understand they're also people.
Yeah, but
right?
but Thabiso,
and they also
do you hear what I'm hearing as well? I don't know if this is as loud to you as it is as loud to me, because sometimes it gets back to that aspect of, do you know the rhetoric that we always talk about, the narrative and the story that we have of white people, right? And whiteness being dominant and whiteness almost being considered as superior, right? And then white people, if you ask them, they say, no, I have a friend who is black. And then you ask them, what is the name of your friend who is black? They can't even name a friend who is black, right? But also that rhetoric that came from the colonial history, where Africans specifically, regardless of where they are from, are considered to be criminals, people that we want to escape from, people that are trouble causers, and people that will probably rob you rather than help you. You know, it's almost as if that same conversation and that same tone of talking about people has been taken by Africans to impart on other Africans as well. You know, they view them as criminals, they view them as people that are unwanted, but also, if you ask them, they're like, no, but I have a friend who is a Zimbabwean. You know, it almost sounds so loud like that for me, because there is almost a relationship. I know there is a colonial journey that we're not even going to get into that also influenced that, but it almost sounds like a remake of that.
So it's I can't be that bad, right? I can't be that bad. I got Zimbabwean friends, right? And I think I think you're spot on with that. But at the same time, perhaps a big difference between like the whole white and black dynamic is, amongst Africans, the community is quite integrated, right? At least in South Africa. If you're coming from Malawi or wherever and you come to live in South Africa and you're working class or poor, you're immediately integrated into South African society of the working class, right? And I think that's a major difference to think about, because it in many ways it also spills into this tension of, I mean, I have been living alongside this person, but I'm also saying all this crap about him and his people, right? And so there's definitely a tension there, but and this is why I bring it up. It's very, or appears to be very difficult to navigate and resolve as just by myself as a regular person. You know what I mean? It becomes very difficult. And that's why the identity politics can take off so easily. Right? That's why, I mean, this whole thing of like borderless South Africa even being a subject, right? Versus Abahambe, this Gayton McKenzie guy saying foreign nationals must leave the country. Like, we're playing into those identity politics and those nuances of
belonging,
othering, right? Yes, othering and belonging is like, this is our land, right? But at the same time, I'm on the ground, I'm talking to people, and a guy will literally say, yeah, look, but I can't treat white people like this because, it's not the same thing, it's levels.
Okay. So, because you're talking about the political now, and you're also mixing it with the social, right? So maybe let's stick to the social for now, and let's see what the people on the ground are saying with the social, and then because I have a question that I want to pin with the just ended elections on the social, but on the political, but let's just stick with the social for now and see what you found on the ground, and then maybe we can take it from there and take it up a notch to the political. Because I think it's so fascinating how these two aspects can be looked at differently, but they are so attached in terms of how they are inherent to each other. The way the political influences the social, but also the way the social drives the political. It's almost as one unit that operates separately, and so that's why I think we should separate them and discuss about them individually. Yeah,
I mean the social implications of the subject matter. Let's
not get too academic with this conversation as well.
I think one of the bigger things to think about, like for society, right, dealing with this subject matter, is once we do this thing of us versus them, we throw ourselves into this huge mess, man. I mean, I'm thinking about Rwanda and what they went through in the 90s, right? Basic us and them, right? Calling people cockroaches, right? Which, by the way, is not very different to the rhetoric and the language of Gayton Mackenzie, right? And it's very dangerous territory, I think. One of the other interesting things that I came across was when I talked to people was just before the actual elections, right? But Gayton Mackenzie had already been running this Abahambe thing, right, with the Patriotic Alliance. But it was very interesting to me that a lot of people that I talked to, most people, had no clue what the hell this Abahambe movement was.
So let's just put it into context for those who are not in South Africa or those who have not been following. The South African elections just ended a few days ago, right? And part of what was important and part of the messaging that was central to the 2024 election for South Africa was the issue of migration. So two sides were contesting in terms of that. There was a side that was going for the Pan-Africanist approach that was saying open the borders and let's have free trade and let's have free travel amongst Africans. But also there was a part that was saying all migrants or foreigners must leave South Africa, and especially using the rhetoric of illegal foreigners, but also it blankets all foreigners. So the Abahambe actually, essentially, if you go to the first episode, I spoke about it, essentially means they must go, and the they in that statement is the other people who don't belong to South Africa, who are foreigners or migrants, or specifically African migrants, or anyone who is closer to African migrants. You can continue.
Yeah. Basically, if you're black and you're poor and you're not from this country, they must go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found it interesting that a lot of people had no clue what this was all about. Right, the Gayton Mackenzie thing. And that's when I got into these conversations to see this tension of like, within my community, this is what it looks like. And that's where people start to come up with all of these justifications. But there is definitely a tension of like, we can empathize. By we, I mean like me, regular South African. I can empathize with the hustle, with the difficult life that a person who's come here from another country has had, blah, blah. But, and that's the thing, there's always a but. And that but is more often than not rooted in the stereotypes that we talked about.
Yep.
And I find that, I don't know, man, for me it's not as black and white as I would like it to be.
Yeah.
I hope it was as easy as, I wish it was as easy as saying, hey, this guy said, Nigerians are like this, so to hell with him. We want nothing to do with him. He's a horrible person, blah, blah. I wish it was as simple as doing that, as saying that and acting that way. The problem with that is once we dismiss people like that, we further that gap.
Okay, so maybe let's see.
Completely, you end up with America.
So maybe let's see the video of what people on the ground are saying first, and then we talk about it after the video as well.
So, the political party are getting the election, right? And they're talking about this thing here, Abahambe. Have you heard of it?
Nope.
So they're talking about illegal immigrants and whether they should be sent back and deported. And EFF is saying, no, open borders.
Open all borders.
You've heard of that,
I've heard of that.
Yeah. What do you think? What's your take on it?
I can say it's dependent on the situation that we are in. Currently, us as citizens, what is it that can we do? It's all based on our votes. And also, if ever it's based on our vote, ANC can say, let them stay. But still, let's look at our borders. EFF can say, let them come. As they say, let's open all borders. But look at the same borders.
What is your take? I mean, you've seen like situation in Mumzanzi, what's your take about the foreigner?
Foreigners. As a statement from a very young age, we usually say, when you grow up, you must put food on the table. So everyone has that mentality that go and put food on the table. So even if it's Arapo, it's like someone trying to make ends meet, since that person, one, might be unemployed, or two, does not even want to go and look for a job. He has to find other means of putting food on the table.
And what's your opinion? Do you think like illegal immigrants must be sent back, or
those who are same story as driving a car without a license? It's illegal, so you are not supposed to do that. So if ever they acquire paperwork so that they can stay in the country.
It's something interesting you said, or putting food on the table. So it sounds to me like you have some empathy for, or you sympathize with the situation of the people. Is that what you're saying? Am I understanding?
Sympathizing? Yes, we are all people at the end of the day. Yeah. No matter either you are brown, black, or pink, that's the same thing. We are all people at the end of the day. So also they do deserve a second chance, even though they are bad sometimes. But remember, one rotten apple spoils the whole pack. But the one at the bottom, you might find that it's not.
What do you mean they're bad sometimes? What are you talking about?
Most of the times, renakas. So you know that crime is all. But most of the time, you find that it's mostly foreigners, and it's those who don't even have any documents to be here.
Okay, this is interesting. We've been talking now. When we've been saying foreigners, who are you seeing in your mind? Who's foreigner?
Wait, Thabiso, maybe let's stop here for a moment.
Yeah.
This dude is really intelligent. First of all, he has his ears, feet, and all his reality, both on politics, the social plight, and everything. When you asked him the first question, he actually said, no, I don't know about the political climate that is happening in terms of Abahambe and all of that discourse. But I can't help to notice how much he's conflicted in terms of saying, no, foreigners are good people, but they are good people because even if someone has to survive, and a person has to do anything that they have to do to survive. So he gave an example of someone who robs people and say, I understand that that person is also trying to have to make a living out of people, right? As much as there is empathy in terms of foreigners, but I think it becomes problematic when there is empathy, but that empathy is coupled with they are doing criminal activities, which he further on said that one bad apple spoils the whole branch, the whole packet, or I don't know what the statement is, pack, and I think that's he highlights where we are as Africans currently. We don't know which information to take and decipher, but also what the information does to us is something that brings out a lot of conflicts within ourselves as well, because we are accepting them, but also most of the people, can you hear the stereotypes coming along as well? Most of the people who are doing crimes in South Africa are people who are foreigners, but most of all those who are undocumented. But if there's one bad foreign apple, then it spoils the whole pack. He is you did the interview so well that he is also in conflict with himself in terms of how do I reconcile the fact that these are people, but also these are people that are doing bad things from the information that I got, but also they are the other that have to be categorized as, undocumented, and one of them is bad and all of them are bad.
I mean, looking back at this now, I can't help but, just hear him out when he prefaced this by saying, we live in the hood, right? And he speaks in that clip. He speaks as if like I should completely understand what he's saying, because we're from the hood. I should completely understand what he's saying. We're from the hood. The foreigners are like this. That's why he says what. Sometimes they are bad. They're bad at times, right? And that's my thing. The sort of tension that you can see him like battling with. When listening to him, I start to battle with it myself. Not that in a slightly different manner. I'm not battling with who belongs or who should live here, who should be gone. No. I'm battling with, can you have empathy for someone and yet simultaneously go, yeah, but maybe they don't deserve to be here. It's very sticky, very gray. I'm struggling to make sense of how how your mind can sit in that. You know what I mean?
I think the conflict, the tension that it brings for me is how we think of the categories that we pack people in, right? So you can pack people in the category of foreigners, right? But that category of foreigners is stuck next to the category of criminals, which is very dangerous ground, right? I can give an example. There's this Sky News reporter who came to interview people in the 2008 xenophobic attacks.
We attacked them with knives, everything, machetes, man, because we are very, very angry because we can't accept that.
What happens if they don't go?
If they don't go, they will get a piece of this. And their shops will be looted.
But I'm also a foreigner in your country. I'm British and I'm working in your country. Yes. Does that mean you'd attack me?
No, because you are not doing the bad things.
And what she did was so amazing because she was interviewing these guys and they were saying, if someone is a foreigner and they don't have documents, we are going to necklace them, we are going to kill them, we are going to attack them, so they have to go back home, right? Which is the same rhetoric that we see now. It's the same statements that we see now. But at the end of that interview, she said, so you are going to attack all foreigners? Then they said, yes, we're going to attack all foreigners who stay within the township. And then she said, but I am a foreigner. And the guys were just like, oh, they didn't even think of her as a foreigner. They didn't even comprehend of her as a foreigner. So for me, it is because it blurs the lines of who is a criminal and who is not. Who do we categorize in a category of this is a foreigner and this is not. This is illegal. This person is legal and this person is not illegal. Because we have seen situations and circumstances where also people from South Africa, people who are South Africans, have been attacked because they have been packed in the same category of being foreigners, and which is attached to being criminals and all of that.
But like I said earlier when we started, man, I think class still plays a role in how this thing plays out in real life, right? I mean, had that lady been a vendor speaking reporter, and they could hear that little vendor twang, that maybe would have gone a little bit differently, in 2008. And that's why I'm also like sticking to listening to this guy when he prefaces what he says by, that statement that we live in the hood. I think there's definitely a class thing going on there. If if you're like upper middle class and you're Zimbabwean, you're Nigerian, you're Malawian, you're South African, life is very different from Nigerian, Malawian, South African working class living in the hood, you know? And that has impacts on how we get along socially as well. If you go to the golf courses in South Africa, it's freaking amazing how all these different guys from different places just get along. But I mean, obviously, it's like within this particular ritual of playing golf and networking, etc. But what does that look like in the hood? What is a version of that in the hood? You know,
Yeah, I get it. Okay,
those are
let's
the
proceed
gray
with it.
areas. Yeah. All right, cool. Let's continue.
If I myself go to any other country besides
Yeah.
my current country of residence, what we call a foreigner.
Yeah.
So foreigner is much more like.
But the people that we're talking about now, who are we talking about? Where are they from?
That's a generalization that we call foreigners people from Somalia, Pakistani, and the rest, Nigeria. We call them foreigners. But if we go to an aspect of white people, we don't call them foreigners. Why is it not that way? Because Retweji, those ones who do bad things.
Which ones are the ones who do bad?
All the group that comes from. It may not be from outside, but it's usually those people whom normally we live with on a day-to-day basis. You know, that guy who fixes what there, when the sun sets, he goes out and becomes something else.
Why are white people not in that box when we're talking foreigner? You were saying just now already.
White people, we usually call them colonizers. Yeah, that's even we call them colonizers, but not foreigners. So if ever you grew up calling white people colonizers, we'll keep the same mentality even until you grow up.
Tell me about something. No,
makwerekwere actually is a word from Limpopo. It's not a word from. If you go to I'm not Nigerian. I'm not from Kitwakele, Limpopo.
Hey.
So makwerekwere is a term that comes from Limpopo.
No,
that's a term from Limpopo. If ever we see any other foreign, we call them makwerekwere. Because it's someone that we don't want around that community.
Don't want.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Not everyone will be friendly with that individual.
Yeah.
So even the same term applies even in two cultures. King, Tsonga and Pedi.
Yeah.
Tsongas we call them Mashangane, and also they call us I forgot that term, but they have a specific term in which they call us. There's a term that's used.
So that's interesting. So for you, it's not is it a derogatory term? Is it like a bad word?
I can't say it's a bad word. So I can't say it's a bad, unless remember, words are innocent until you give them meaning.
I mean, when people call African foreigners makwerekwere, in that context, is it a bad word?
In their context, yes. That's why I'm saying that a word is innocent until you give it its own meaning.
How come we don't call like white people makwerekwere? Like someone British or Polish?
How do you call someone who's above you lekwerekwe?
What do you mean above?
Remember, okay, let me retrieve a bit of that history that's disappearing from my mind. As we said, or as I know, Gering, Dutch and British are the ones that colonized South Africa. So, if that's the case, that they both, like those ones colonized South Africa, how do you call someone who colonized the country? That person will deport you back.
So is it something about like, is it power? Is it
it's dependent, obvious. It's dependent on status. I myself, as someone who's just working with flip-flops, you can do whatever that you want. Even if you can just come in with my... It's obvious, you know that he's just a black guy, he won't do anything. But now, the opposite comes when you bump into a white person. You start calculating your thoughts, or no. That's no longer an African person like me. That's a white person. I have to think of other ways.
And in that example, if that person is a Zimbabwean or Somali,
Same story. You start, as Africans, you start taking advantage of the fact that that person is also an African like me.
you take
And
advantage
start do whatever.
because
It's
why is it easier to take advantage of them?
because he's the same individual as me. He's an African like me. But if it's not an African, that's when you won't even start taking advantage.
You know what scares me, bro? What scares me after watching this is apart from your epic interviewing skills and how you played the tension with him, bro, I think that's very commendable. Like, but what scares me is how he highlights the internalization of power dynamics and how they are naturalized within the African continent. It's so scary to see that we are at a point where colonizers is not a derogatory term. It doesn't have negative connotations, which he affirms also by saying, no, but these people are colonizers. So, but he also says they can chase you out. South Africa is an African country who chase you out two-way. They can deport you two-way. But also he adds that by saying that they are actually superior, or they are more powerful than you. I think
You said I like the way you put it. He said above.
Yes, he said they are above. The way he is so in touch with, unfortunately, for lack of a better word, what I have to call the realities of the power dynamics in Africa. It's scary. It's scary because he portrayed these social structures that we have in Africa, and he located himself within those social structures, and there was no problem. There was no negativity with that, but also how much of that is a reality of life within Africa. I find that very scary.
I'll tell you what hit me hard. I think what hit me hard, and maybe if you're watching and you felt similarly, just tell us a bit about what took you hard on this. What hit me was him saying, I'm thinking of your question, Africans, why can't we get along? And then this guy goes, well, you can't call a white person Gwera because they're above you. But an African, you can take advantage of them. They are also African. If you're going to simplify answer, it's right there. It's got the stereotype, it's got the othering, it's got the power dynamics, And that, when I'm talking to the guy in the street, it's like, yeah, we just keep going with the conversation, but that's really scary when you think about it.
But he also but he also puts himself in that position, and he says, you see, I'm wearing flops, and I can be taken advantage of, and it is justified that I'm taken advantage of because I'm not in the class of people who should actually be seen as human. It's like the justification of that dehumanization already without someone even dehumanizing you. It's like, yes, you can take advantage of people who are below us, but I'm also below, so someone can be justified for taking advantage of. The levels of the internalization for me is like it's so profound.
What it makes me think of, the way you put it, Mampela Rampel,
Yes,
she's an anthropologist, and she was at some point she was part of the black BCM, Black Consciousness Movement of South Africa.
Yeah.
I think she was mistress of Steve Biko at some point. She had a very interesting life, but she did write a controversial dissertation where she was talking about gender-based violence in South Africa, right? And she was saying that when you think about it, black men were abused and assaulted, sexually assaulted by the apartheid system, right? And then they get home and they take it out on their wives. That's why we end up where we are right now, right? It's the cycle of abuse. Right? It was a very controversial dissertation, but that's what this makes me think of, right? Or how this becomes so normalized in the way that this guy speaks of it, and seeing where he's at in the middle of it all.
Yeah.
And again, I have to repeat, it's frightening, man. It's actually frightening.
There's a paper that I wrote when I spoke about how colonialism was the most successful journey. Not because I'm putting it in a positive light or anything, but because of the fact that people who are colonized or people who were colonized have now internalized the process and can now mobilize it on their own. You know, the people who colonize don't have to do anything. They just have to sit back, relax, and watch a process that they created be in motion. You know, they don't have to hate anyone who is beneath them, so to speak. People now categorize each other, and then they attack each other, they kill each other, they dehumanize each other on their own. Everything that was done within colonization, they are now practicing it on their own, which is the reality that this guy is also talking about.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, man. I mean, if I think about like the South African context and I think about apartheid and the legacy of apartheid, you have to admit apartheid was executed quite well. If you look at the legacy now, you can see that these guys did look at Cape Town, the city planning. These guys did a very decent job. If you know the results of that city planning are still seen today. So all of this to say, because I don't want to get into like colonization as a big topic. I think all of this is to say that that legacy has had an effect on, you know, in the way in which we've internalized it, has had an effect on our identities and our and othering.
Yeah, but also I think what he said that was profound was the fact that language doesn't have meaning, or words do not have meaning until you actually assign some sort of meaning to them. And I think within his responses as well, you could see how language is a force to be reckoned with, because he also spoke about Amashangani as a derogatory term, of which I don't think Amashangani is it's not a derogatory term. It's actually a tribe that's in South Africa, and I think it's Mashangani / Tsonga people, and I stand corrected, but I think it is important to see to note that, and people, you can correct me also in the comments, because I think it is important to note that. No, but there are people who are Shangani in South Africa from Limpopo.
Yeah, so
I know they also go to.
Yeah, so there's in South Africa, my understanding is people divide the ethnicity, Tsonga versus the language versus the ethnicity, Tsonga and Shangan, right? But if you go to Mozambique, there's like Shangan people who speak Shangan. It's a very similar, pretty much the same language. And
okay,
I digress a little bit, but this is something very interesting that I learned, and I hope it's true because it's fantastic. The history of it is in the Zulu clan, there was a guy who was basically infighting with Abu Shaka Zulu in there, right? And he basically committed treason, and in fear of his life, he left, right? He left, headed to what we know today as Mozambique, right? But when he left his wives and his children behind, right? And in isiZulu, he left his children behind. Oshiengani.
And that's how it became Shangan.
Shangan. I hope it's true, but it's fantastic.
Okay, this is something that we both need to research on, but I think people who are watching this can also tell us if this is
please, especially
a reality.
People, help us out.
Help us out. Let us know, like, how do you dissect between Shangani and Tsonga? Because I know the language is one. I actually have a best friend who is Tsonga, who's gonna be disappointed that I don't know the difference. But I think it's profound to note that Shangani and Tsonga, or Shangani, is used as a derogatory term because it actually is an official term to that refers to an ethnic group. So the fact that it almost is seen as an offensive term or an offense to other people, because he said we call them Shangani to offend them, you know, is like the is like profoundly showing the power of language that he's talking about as well, because there is also a lack of that information, which I really want to find out about and also learn more about as well. But now, how does the political fit into this? Because we can see how society is framed, but we can also see how there is a merge of the realities of colonialism, class, and all these other factors. But how does the politics feed into this? Does it confirm or affirm what is happening, or does it fuel this divisional frame of power? How does it fit into it?
I think I'm gonna play you a clip, right? But before that, I think a big thing that's happened is, like I said earlier, it's so easy now to jump on the bandwagon and get some points as a political party, just from this, just as something to run with or run against, because it touches people, And so, as a result, there was a rally near my home. There was a rally by the EFF, which we talked about, and I decided to go there, right? By the way, it sucked.
Yeah.
I had no idea political rallies suck so much. Like, they're terrible. It's like one big party. I find it so pointless. Anyway.
It's a political party.
It's a party. Anyway, I'm going to play this clip of one of the guys who was there that I talked to, and I think he might be one of the comrades, because he was speaking like he's campaigning. And let's have a listen to what he says, and then we're going to dissect this conversation about the political side of this.
What do you think about that? PA north of them, speaking things that don't make any sense, because when you talk about Abahambe, the first people that must leave are your white people. And I'm not saying white people should leave, but I'm saying if he says Abahambe prevails, that means white people should be the first ones. Because our fellow black people that he's claiming Abahambe, they're from Africa. And South Africa is part of Africa. It's part of the whole continent. So Abahambe doesn't make sense. And Abahambe has a personal agenda that the Patriotic Alliance, which is the PA, is trying to push. So Rena as a EFF was saying, anyone that is African, that is willing to work in South Africa and willing to produce in South Africa can come.
Do you think a lot of South Africans are relating to
no,
that?
They might not relate.
Yeah.
They might not relate because they are South African conscious. They're thinking on the boundaries of South Africa. If me as a South African, like myself as an individual, I am welcomed in Nigeria, I am welcomed in Ghana, I am welcomed in Zambia, I am welcomed in Zimbabwe. So I can go anywhere in Africa. You understand? As long as I have the correct documentation that are currently needed by Africans, I can go there. So as we welcome anybody that's from Africa who has the correct and authentic documents to come here, obviously you are welcome. So but even if you have found yourself here because of emergency, because there's no food at home, because there's nothing at home to eat, your family has sent you to South Africa, you are welcomed here. We are not only welcoming those who are financially able to survive in South Africa, even those who are not financially able. Because us, when we were in exile, we were in Zambia and we were not financially able. And Zambians welcomed us.
It sounds like a very Pan-African approach.
Yes, we are here as Pan-Africans. EFF is Pan-African conscious. We are saying as all Africans, let us combine. South Africans, wake up. Don't only be South African conscious. There are land in Nigeria. There is land in Zambia. So there is land in Kenya.
Let me ask you something. Musosha, I've talked to a lot of people about Musosha. A lot of people empathize with like immigrants, but at the same time talk about like crime by immigrants. Musosha, what do you think of that?
Let us be very clear. Crime doesn't stand on the ground. Anything never starts on the ground. It starts up there. So if we talk about crime here, Who is it being promoted by? That's the first question. Who is allowing crime? That's the second question. Same as illegal immigrants. Who is allowing illegal immigrants? Whose laws are allowing illegal immigrants? So stop before looking at the EFF. Look at what is currently happening. We as the EFF, we are not willing to chase anybody. We as the EFF are willing to work with everybody who's Pan-Africanist, who's willing to develop Africa anywhere. So it's not about Nigeria, it's not about Zambia. No, it's about Africa as a whole, my brother.
Got it.
Thabiso, I want to ask something before we get into this clip that's so profound in terms of information. So just for context, the South African elections just ended, and the ruling party lost a lot of the population of its vote, but also that was also contributed to by a new party that was formed by the previous president. But part of what I wanted to talk about is that the EFF, the party that the gentleman in this video represented, lost a bulk of its territory in South Africa. Do you think it was because of the opening border message, or was it the realities of the political climate that just emerged within the South African climate just before the elections?
I do not think it had anything to do with the open borders message. For the most part, even people at the rally couldn't engage with that subject because they're like, what are you talking about?
Wait, even people at the rally?
Even people, I have evidence for you. Let me show you.
Because why I find this so crazy to believe is the way that this guy dissected migration. I don't know, maybe you said he was one of the comrades, but he dissected migration in a way that showed understanding, because he talked about all levels of migration, and opening borders not implying that people can come to South Africa without their documents. Doesn't mean that. It means ease of entrance, but it means the fact that you still have to have your documents, and you have to have your authentic document. I was listening to the EFF president also stating that it means that free trade, which is what Africa is trying to go anyway. So, but also he spoke about refugees, and not boxing everybody as illegal foreigners, but those who are undocumented. If things are hard at home, if the reality of your home is unlivable, we are also welcoming you to South Africa, which I found was profound in the way that he layered his Pan-Africanist conversation, so to speak, as you put it out there.
Doesn't it sound a little bit like that guy who said he can sympathize with people trying to make a living, right? He put it in a slightly different way, but him saying if things are hard at home, you're still welcome here, right? But what's missing from this conversation, which I couldn't have because the party got a little bit too rowdy, is the part about what of these so-called foreigners who come and commit crimes here? Because fundamentally, a big issue for South Africans, say like working class, mainstream South Africans, majority of South Africans, it's things that are close to home, like crime, right? We can't say we can't make everything abstract, because it's as simple as, yo, dude, I'll get robbed every couple of months. What are you gonna do about that?
It brings back to the conversation about, is crime a problem within the South African context, or are migrants committing crime the problem within the South African context? And I argue that crime is a problem within the South African climate, even if you remove foreigners within the South African climate, and it's on all levels of the South African society. I don't agree with problematizing foreigners as the ones that are responsible for committing crimes within the South African climate. And I don't, because I don't think they are the stats for it, but if we're going to look at the stats of who commits more crime and which it goes back to the class argument, where if you go into areas that are advantaged, crime increases, and that's because of a lot of reasons. If you come to Cape Town, it includes gangs, it includes corruption, it includes lack of opportunities and employment, it includes all those other things that I can't even mention, right? And the layers of those aspects that are controlled by foreigners, so to speak, are realistically few, because foreigners don't have control of the gangs. They don't have control of all the facets of the criminal activities within South Africa, which begs the question for me, like, I know crime is a problem, but are foreigners the ones that are running crime within South Africa?
Yep, but you're missing the point if that's the question, because the argument that I'm making here is, okay, picture a mother of two who has to wake up every day at 4:30 a.m. to catch a train to get to work, right? And come back home at 8 p.m. using that train, right? She's got a lot to consider. She's got a lot on her plate. How's she going to feed these two kids with this lifestyle, right? Very little expendable income, right? And you're trying to have this conversation with that person. All she knows, all she cares about is that when she gets on that train, she has to be able to get there safely, right? If she's going to blame anyone for crime, it's going to be very subjective. It's going to be based a lot on her experiences or the experiences of those close to her. That's going to be, if she's in Cape Town, she's going to say something about the colored boys or drugs or something. If she's in Pretoria, she's definitely going to say something about African foreign nationals. So that's the argument that I think I'm looking at the most. I don't have the stats either, right? But even if I did and it proved that, it goes without saying, by the way, South Africa has a crime problem. I don't think, and I think the issue is people are focusing too much on who's committing the crime instead of the structures that should be there to prevent the crime. You see, so South Africa definitely, dude, South Africa is always, as far back as I can remember, South Africa has had a crime problem, right? But what we haven't been great at is dealing with that, right? Sharp. But what that leads to as well is reinforcing these stereotypes, because people continue having these terrible experiences in life. Everybody wants to blame someone. That's the thing. And the whole thing of blaming, you mentioned earlier, immigrants are very likely to be at the end of that stake, right? To get the blame. In France, it's been happening to African immigrants there quite a lot, actually. They even get profiled by police there, right? So if you're an immigrant, in the US, Trump, I mean, come on, right? Populism has just blown up this thing. So it's not a uniquely South African thing, but I think what might be uniquely South African is that while all of this is happening, you've got a party that says, nah, to hell with it, open up all the borders, let's all get along, let's all trade together, blah, blah, blah. And people are like, yo, I got robbed this morning by a guy from Mozambique. What are you talking about?
And it's a difficult conversation to have, because also my problem is, if we are having that conversation from a subjective point of view, fair and fine, right? But don't let the subjective points now dictate the overall points, right? Because if you say crime is a problem in South Africa, last week I was robbed, right? It's different from saying these migrants are robbing me everywhere, are robbing people every week. You are now mobilizing this tone of saying everyone who's a foreigner is robbing people, or if you get robbed, the most chances are you get robbed by a foreigner. And I understand it's a conversation that we can't have with someone who is in a climate where they're just focusing on putting food on the table. But the stereotypes and the prejudices and the statements that come from those spaces as well are contributing a lot to foreigners being attacked, foreigners being killed, and foreigners being generally hated and not being engaged with.
Yeah.
And that's a strong proponent for an argument to say, why don't we also change that conversation, change that rhetoric, and like what you said, focus on the fact that crime is a problem, and how do we change the dynamics of what contributes to crime, what actually leads to crime, and what drives crime in South Africa.
Yeah, I also think one of the reasons that makes it difficult is how sensitive of a subject it is, right? Because in South Africa, when we say crime, we're not just talking about like fraud and gunpoint robbed on the street. We're talking about very violent crime, incredibly violent crime. And so you can imagine why it's a very sensitive matter. At the same, yeah, but I don't know, man. It's in my head. There are a lot of gray areas that 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 as a society we're not confronting. And that's why these interviews in the street are like people trying to figure out where they stand and
In the
you know,
moment.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like damn, I never really thought about it like this, and yeah, there's
But I think the sensitivity that you are bringing about is something that makes this podcast really imperative, because if a subject that we are talking about is easy to talk about, then we're not going to talk about it anyway. We want to talk about conversations that people run away from and escape from, but give them time to stop and think about those things. But we'll talk about that later in terms of the other conversations like that we're going to have.
Yeah, and I think we should get some Ghanaian dude, man, from Hillbrow or something, or from like Claremont, to break
Yep.
down his life experience,
And I love that. If you're someone from Ghana, or if you're a Ghanaian who's watching, or if you know a Ghanaian or a Nigerian who's in South Africa, who would be glad to talk to us, or who has actually stayed in South Africa and is not in there anymore, or who has experiences of being a migrant or a foreigner in an African country, please reach out to us, and we are more than happy to reach out to them and have a conversation, because I think it'll be a very exciting conversation as well.
Yeah, or Kenyan, because apparently the Kenyans love us. Kenyan.
Yes, let's have Kenyans. If you're Kenyan and you've stayed in a foreign country and you've been treated in a way that's messed up, or your experience is just of being a foreigner, please also reach out to us.
Let me ask you a question. So we're talking about like some of the social implications and the political climate, right? And I think there's still a bit more to be said about the political climate. If you look at yourself, your own experience, ideally, what should things be like for like Africans getting along? What when you say Africans getting along, what are we talking about? What ideally, what is that?
Ideally is all the things that divide us actually being reasons for us to be curious about each other. So you and I are different. You are South African, I'm originally Zimbabwean, but I ask you questions about the Legodis, about your personhood, about social and all of that. By the way, please go and watch the entries. It's a documentary. It's a channel that Thabiso has that speaks about these things as well. But it's our differences actually building curiosities than our differences bordering us. So the fact that we have a different religion, it should actually breed curiosity rather than breeding divisions. The fact that we are from different countries, it should build curiosities rather than differences, so that way we can coexist, and it doesn't matter if you are from South Africa or from Zimbabwe. I'm like, I want to know more about you. I want to know more about your people. I want to know more about how you live. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim or if you are Christian or if you are an atheist. I want to know more about how you live. But why that's not the ideal is all the sensitives that we have been talking about. Some religions have been labeled as taboo. Some ways of living have been labeled as taboo. Some political affiliations have been labeled as taboo. So people don't even engage with anything that's different anymore. So for me, the ideal way of living would be where differences build curiosities and not divisions.
Okay, let's bring it to something a little bit closer to home for people. So differences, we become curious, right? Ideally, in a perfect world. What happens to things like healthcare? If you're Zimbabwean in Zimbabwe, should the state prioritize you over a South African, Nigerian, whatever, that's moved to Zimbabwe when it comes to state-provided healthcare?
Why should a state be thinking about prioritizing in terms of healthcare? What does their oath say in terms of healthcare? The oath says that they should give services to people who are in need of services or something of that sort. Please correct me. I think it's called the Hippocratic Oath, you know?
Yeah,
it doesn't say... It doesn't
remember,
say...
we're not talking about... No, let me rephrase. We're not talking about how the doctors take care of people. We're talking about when the state is putting out money for healthcare, funding hospitals and clinics. Should they be saying, we need to take care of Zimbabweans first?
That's what I'm saying. The first needs to be substituted, because when they are thinking of someone from Poland, they don't say, should we take care of people from Poland first? So why is that even on your manifesto to say who should be prioritized in terms of healthcare and nationality or a non-nationality? For me, it doesn't add up. It defeats the whole point of caring or providing health care. I think, and I say I'm a proponent of the fact that people, where they can, they should pay for their health care and they should pay for their health benefits. But the exclusion of it should not be a premise of the government, because now look at the fact that, realistically speaking, some countries realistically don't have healthcare, and people are coming to other countries to get for simple things. I don't know how simple they are, like giving birth, you know. And in that, now the healthcare system, should it be loaded with the question of, should we provide healthcare? Should we provide healthcare to a person from another country, or just providing healthcare? You know, for me, it defeats the purpose of healthcare, and I don't think they should be debating that. That's honestly what I think, because if they are spending money on it, right, they should still treat everybody as humane as possible. I don't know how to answer this, man. You're having me on my feet right now, but I don't know how to answer that.
Here's the thing. If we're spending money on it, right, as the Zimbabwean state government, or whatever you want to call it, if we're spending money on it, right, and then it turns out we can't afford to take care of everybody, which in some countries is the case, at some point, you have to decide who you're going to take care of first, prioritize. Now, I raise this because what you were saying, like differences, let's become curious. Because in South Africa, we had a case a couple of years ago. I think it was before COVID, a couple of years BC. We had a case where I think health MEC in Limpopo, Mpumalanga, I can't remember exactly, but she was in the hospital, right? And she was pointing at this. I think she was a Zimbabwean lady who had just given birth or something. She said, "You're stealing our resources, blah blah. You should go back to your country." Blah, blah. It really horrible, harsh. And when you talk to healthcare workers in South Africa, right, what that lady, that MEC, that woman was expressing is very common, and like it's far from being the exception, right? And I've got like health people in healthcare in my circle. You'll be surprised about the things they say about, like, these Mozambicans, you know, they are a weight on the healthcare system, and they're not paying taxes. I heard one say 90%, obviously it's not like proven, but like majority of the patients are not South African, right? And they were complaining about like whether we can afford this, blah blah blah. And so my point is, if we're gonna talk about how do we get along, at some point we have to confront these things, right?
But Thabiso, I think what we are talking about here, if we really want to really listen to the conversation that we are having about right now, it's not of a healthcare system that's flooded. It's of people who don't want to have Africans helped in the healthcare system, because they are of the assertion that they are flooding the healthcare system. We don't have a situation where the healthcare system is actually flooded. And it's like debating, Thabiso, that if we pick 50 Rand, what are we going to use the 50 Rand for? Right? We don't have the 50 Rand, and we can't be arguing that, right? That's for government to argue. But what I'm saying, the conflict is happening within the hospitals, which gets back to the point that they don't want people from other countries to be helped, except if the color of their skin is paler, right? they don't want them to be helped because the problem of the funds, is it in existence? You can correct me if I'm wrong, if that problem is in existence, right? But it's just the presence, the mere presence of people from other countries. I've had participants who've told me in research that this other lady, she was pregnant and she was supposed to deliver, but because she couldn't speak a language of those nurses, right, who are trained in English, she wasn't served until a white doctor came to help her, right? What was happening in this space? Was it a strain on healthcare resources? No, it was just healthcare facilitators who didn't want to help someone who's not from, which is the problem that we have. And essentially that's what I'm hearing, not the healthcare system that's under pressure.
I think there's I'm trying to find it. There's a book that you guys should read called Period Pain by Kopano Matlo. And she was she was a doctor, MD, right? And then she left. Yeah, she left healthcare. But she was a doctor during 2008 in South Africa, and she talks about the things that she saw, how Mozambican women, for example, were treated, and how they were treated as like less than people. And it happens. It's very common, man. It's like incredibly common. It's very scary. But I think at some point we need to talk to those people in the healthcare system, man. At some point,
we really do.
Yeah.
I also want to hear the realities of that. But also I think it goes back to the point that that we're making. I'm forgetting the point now. If I think about it, I'll drop it.
No, but you were saying the problem isn't really about like whether the state can afford. The problem is people are just going no to. It's just an othering thing. It's like regardless, we would still come up with some excuse. Is what you say.
Yeah, essentially that's where the problem is. But there's a point that I made earlier on that I wanted to talk about, but I just forgot about it. But Thabiso, we only have 10 minutes left, at least for Riverside, right? And I wanted to use these 10 minutes to talk a bit more about some of the comments that we received and possibly go online with the conversation, and possibly address some of the comments that we received, right? So maybe let's pick a comment each, and then so we have received a lot of comments on TikTok mostly, but also a lot of engagement that we receive and appreciate from YouTube. But we wanted to make sure that we actively engage with the people that are sending these comments as well within these platforms. So I'll go ahead and read the first one, and maybe Thabiso, you can respond to it. So this one is Victor Berry from TikTok, and Victor Berry says, "We love each other. We are busy campaigning here in South Africa, and we don't take these guys who are campaigning and saying Abahambe seriously." What do you think of that?
I think there's some truth to that. From what I've seen, fortunately, we just had the election and we can reflect on it, right? I think there's some truth to that. I think a lot of what's happening in South Africa is many of us have no idea or had no idea who to vote for, but definitely knew who not to vote for. So we made a lot of votes against, and that makes me happy, actually. I think more people should vote against. And there's definitely some truth to that, and I saw that at the EFF rally, right? I know it's like a small sample, but even in my own circles, I don't know about you, but in my own circles, the Abahambe thing was non-existent. No one was talking about that. The main thing about
even when I went into field, people didn't know about it.
Yeah, the main thing I kept hearing when I went, the main thing I kept hearing about that political party, the Patriotic Alliance, was about the colored vote and how the DA in the Western Cape was. DA, by the way, if you don't know, is the main opposition party in South Africa, the biggest opposition party. And how they would use losing the colored vote in the Western Cape to this guy, Gayton McKenzie. But nothing I'd say substantial. But also, I might be a little bit off here because politics of South Africa I find incredibly dull. When it comes to the public discourse and the rhetoric,
Yeah.
and maybe it's because I consume too much American American news and content, because those guys are exciting, bro. They got like a criminal running for presidency.
Yeah.
We had that at some point, but I'm finding it's getting dull, and maybe dull is good because it means we have some sensible people. Yeah, that's my take on that. So yes, I think the comment is quite on point.
Cool. Okay. So the comment was from TikTok, and the comment went as follows: Why are you gunning for South Africa whenever we are talking about African unity? Where is Nigeria in the scheme of things? Where is Rwanda, and where is Morocco? Thabiso.
Yeah, I think the podcast is called Africans on Africa. We will get there. We're gonna cover all of these other countries. A big part of it is you guys just engaging. Come up, tell us what's going on. In terms of your point of view, your experiences. I mean, this episode alone, we mentioned Rwanda somewhere there. Even talked about Nigeria. I've been to Nigeria. Someday I'll tell you guys about how interesting that place is. And I recommend everybody to visit Nigeria. I don't know how the Nigerians feel about that. Tell us. But also talk about Zimbabwe. I've never been. I've been to Zimbabwe, but I'm not Zimbabwean. And I think we need more of those, like what people's own experiences are around the continent. So I'd love to visit Morocco. I hear the food is good, but I don't know about the people at all. There's also like that North Africa, sub-Saharan Africa thing, right? That dynamic where apparently some North Africans say we're Arab first before we're African. That's a conversation for another day. I'd love to talk about that, especially connecting that to the colored community of South Africa, and they I suppose like their stance on things when it comes to like Arab or so-called Arab problems, right, and how they identify with the Arab world. So yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. Stick around.
I think we also rely on everybody who is participating and engaging as well to make sure that we have a holistic approach to all our content. We have been in different countries throughout Africa, but we haven't immersed ourselves enough to be able to actually be able to know the full story. So we are relying on everybody to also give us the full story.
Didn't you want to move to Kenya?
Kenya is home. I love Kenya, and I'm feeling a lot of love from the Kenyans. So I always say, people always ask me why I wear this, but I think I got it from some Kenyan friends, but also I think Kenya has always shown me love. The people there are amazing. The culture is amazing. And the interactions that I've had with Kenyans.
I hear they drink like crazy over there.
It's the only place, surprisingly, I haven't traveled a lot, but it's the only place that actually has when you ask for beer, they ask you if you have if you want warm beer or if you want cold beer. And I find it a very weird concept, but surprisingly people drink warm beer there, but they have amazing beer. And I once attended this thing called Sunday service where on Sunday people chill and they drink. So it's actually a great place to be. I love the people from Kenya. I have received so much love from Kenya. I
hope we get to go there and
I hope so. I'm hoping that we
shoot an episode from there.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we shoot an episode from there, and we want to shoot a documentary from there as well that we have in the pipeline. So a lot of work that we want to do within Kenya, but also all over Africa. We want to be an African-based podcast.
They have a very interesting hustle culture. There's a phrase for it. I did a project on this. There's a phrase for it. I forgot the phrase in Swahili, which is basically
Please comment below.
Yeah, there's a phrase, and the phrase is basically like, you gotta make things happen. You gotta like just keep going, do your thing. Oh man, I'll try and remember
Isn't it
it.
the kitoko phrase where they like slowly
No,
but
it's
surely,
something
but it's
else.
not a hustling phrase.
No, it's
Okay.
something else. It's about hustle. Yeah, it's very, very dope stuff.
Amazing. Yeah. So we'll definitely get there. And I think it's something that we want to intentionally do and engage with a lot of people from other African countries as well. But invite us, buy our tickets, and we are on our way to those countries as well. But we're excited to be engaging with people from all the other countries as well. But I think the last comment that we will engage with is this one actually came in this morning, and I found it very relieving, but also thought-provoking in the way that it was structured, but also the way that it came in. So it's a comment from YouTube, and it goes like this. Listening from the US, as a diasporan, glad that you have decided to launch your channel as the first topic as to why Africans, both in the continent and throughout the diaspora, cannot get along is a very important and critical area to engage or address, as it is key to our collective existential trajectory. The three salient points that you have detailed are indeed keys to why we can't be racially cohesive. Psychology is a discipline of interest to me as well. I often wonder if the jealousy, envy, or our inability to create multi-generational legacy that are prevalent in how we interact with each other are functions of centuries of material deprivation and scarcity as produced by TAST and colonialism. Perhaps why those we often trust to lead us politically and economically exercise nothing but egocentrism and narcissistic behavioral patterns. I look forward to hearing more from your platform and broadening my scope. You are not a pseudo-intellectual for sure. I read the comments specifically to Zimbabwe, and it seems that there is the propensity to listen solely based on one's individual experiences, when you were clear on the onset that you are talking specific to the life experiences whose genesis is your own socio-cultural space. We have to put our differences aside and move with intentionality in elevating our race, as the first quarter of our 21st century will come to an end. Otherwise, generations that have to be born will come and continue to suffer. Congratulations on your podcast. So,
for clarity, if you guys are wondering, TAST is a reference to the transatlantic slave trade.
Yes, thank you for that, Thabiso. So I find that this comment is something that I'm happy about, obviously, because this person is also engaged with the podcast, and I appreciate the fact that people are engaging with the podcast at such levels, and actually engaging with the content that we are creating at such level, not only questioning what we are doing, but also complimenting the things that we are doing correctly as well. So I'll say it again and again. A lot of the things that Thabiso and I will say, or a lot of the things that the guests will say, and this is why we're going to bring guests on the podcast as well. It's because we want people to speak from their experiences. And this is very important because experiences of Africans are either neglected or ignored. Nobody writes our stories the way that we write our stories. So we don't want to denigrate the experiences of people. We actually want to appreciate the experience of people. That's why, as much as subjectivity is defined as something that can be dangerous, but we also appreciate subjectivity because nobody knows that experience that you have gone through more than you. I'll talk about how people have taken our experiences and dramatized them, or even imagined experiences that we don't even know about. If we can talk about the Wakanda effect or the Kunta Kinte effect. So if someone is from Gambia, I want to know if Kunta Kinte is a real name or Kunta is a real name. But also it's like if you meet someone from Europe or in the Americas, and then you say, I'm from Zimbabwe, and then they say, oh, Wakanda forever. How many of you actually relate with the aspect of Wakanda? Because we don't even know what Wakanda is. It's an imagination of someone who wrote an African story. And as much as I also went to see the movie, how much does it relate to the real experiences of being African? Also, the Kunta Kinte story, slave trade happened, but the way that slave trade happened, was it the way that it was portrayed in that movie? We have taken a backseat while people have written stories about us, but also have imagined our experiences and told our experiences, and we haven't done much about it. And the purpose of the podcast is for us to also do something about our experiences, write our own stories, write our own subjective experiences. And this is why I think it is important to also be talking from that individual experience. That's why we also appreciate people who talk from that individual experience. But once we speak from that individual experiences, it is also important for us to open ourselves to other people telling us that either our experiences are not shared by everybody, or the reality that they are an individual experience, or open ourselves to conversation about them, which is what we are trying to do in the podcast. So I appreciate the level of engagement with that comment, but also I think it is important for us to continually clarify that we are biased because we haven't occupied all of Africa. Our experiences are our own and from what we have read, but this is an opportunity for us to learn and share experiences. But those experiences are so important and they are so vital for us to talk about and have this space to talk about them.
Has enough time elapsed that we can admit that that first Black Panther movie was terrible?
Can we even talk about how the narrative or the story of Black Panther doesn't represent Africa, guys? Can we just talk about...
Yeah, to your point, I think, yeah, of course, representation matters, but also we got a lot of work to do ourselves, and so I'm in love with African authors, okay, and I read a lot of them, but I have to admit, particularly South African authors, and I think like these days there's even like festivals for these things, that celebrate African authors. And yeah, it's just a little bit of self-development that each one of us can do. Even if you're reading like fiction, it's just a little bit that we can do ourselves before we get told by someone else who we are. And I think it's a big thing for us, and the podcast is part of the reason for the podcast is to accomplish that part of discovering ourselves and learning from each other and fulfilling that curiosity that you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So I have no idea what it's like to feel like I'm unwanted in a country, but a lot of people do, and that's why we have this. We can engage. We can learn from each other in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think those conversations are important, and that's what we are trying to open ourselves to. Like for me, the thing that is conflicting for me, the thing that has been a sore pain in my life has been the fact that our conversations are so guarded and controlled. We can never talk about sex. Sexual conversations are a taboo. We can never talk about sexual orientation, which we're going to do in the next episode as well. We can never talk about... But also
you're Zimbabwean. You guys couldn't talk about political parties at family gatherings at some point.
Exactly. And I have a friend from Rwanda who tells me that it's something that cannot be said, and also, like, as much as that floor is opening, at least in Zimbabwe, like, it's something that we grew up knowing that there are conversations that we didn't have as African, and there are people who you don't have conversations with. You can have sexual conversations, but you cannot have it with your parents, for example. You can, which has led us into muddier places where some people, what if you're only raised by your parent, and you don't have anyone else and you're in the diaspora? Who do you talk to about these things? Very important conversation. You don't talk about other religions because no other religion exists, and you don't even question that. For me, it's important to be able to question those things. And ask questions like, where does the African religion and African tradition fall in with all of that dynamism? Things that we are not allowed to ask. And that's the point of the podcast. We want to be able to ask those questions, have those conversations, and engage actively with people who want to have those conversations as well, which I think is really important. Thabiso, I have another question for you before I let you give your parting shots. Do Africans belong?
Yeah, man, definitely. I like to think Africans belong everywhere, you know. And
if you didn't ask me where, I was gonna have a problem. Okay, good.
Yeah, I think Africans belong everywhere, but in some cases we were forced to be in some places, you know. But Africans belong, and it's sad when people feel like they don't belong where they are. And a lot of that is because of historical factors, but also like the current state of affairs and attitudes in our society. Yeah.
There are big strongholds that we still have to fight, and the big strongholds that we are implementing on ourselves that we still have to untie ourselves from. And this is what we are trying to do, at least.
Yeah.
Parting shots, Thabiso.
Actually, it's a question to everybody that's watching. So we have this idea, and I wanted to hear what people think about it. One of the busiest, controversial, corrupt border passings on the continent, Bait Bridge. We wanna shoot from there. We wanna do an episode being there, and more like an experiential thing, as we discuss the topics that's around that. In terms of, you know, Africans on Africa. I don't know if that's something you guys would be keen to see. I'm sure a lot of people haven't even seen or been to Bait Bridge. I've been to Bait Bridge. It gets hectic. People who've been there will tell you. So yeah, that's my parting shot. Does Bait Bridge sound like a good idea?
And also, I think if you have had an experience of Bait Bridge and the other side of Bait Bridge, you're also a person that we want to talk to. You know, we want to hear your experiences about Bait Bridge. So apart from going there, we also want to know the realities of what is happening at Bait Bridge.
You know what we could do?
And I wanna
you know what we could
talk about those things.
Well, we could. You know what we could. So there's the other channel where I do short documentaries called The Entries. I suggest you guys check it out. But what we could do, if you guys think Bait Bridge is a good idea, we could also do like a life story thing, like day in the life of someone experiencing Bait Bridge, and do a short documentary alongside
transported Bait Bridge.
Exactly, something like that. Yeah. But anyway, we'll hear what you guys think. Let us know.
Yeah, I think it's a great parting shot, Thabiso. From my side, I think let's continue having these conversations and engagement. We not only want to produce content, but we also want people to actively engage with us, ask us questions, criticize us, give us feedback. And that's the only way that we can grow and maintain these conversations as well. We want to actively be engaged with the whole podcast community and develop a community actually. And a lot more African countries to get involved in this, and a lot more people from other African countries to be involved in this. And thank you so much for joining us on the second episode of the podcast. And please go and check out The Entries on YouTube. Thabiso is doing some amazing work with documentaries on The Entries, and I would strongly commend that if you're following Africans on Africa, or if you're watching Africans on Africa, please complement that with The Entries documentaries. But also please remember that if you are watching, also subscribe, share, and actively engage in the conversations that we have provided and on Africans on Africa. My name is Ivan Munashe Katsere, and I am an African. Thank you so much for joining.
I'm Thabiso Legodi, and I'm an African. Cheers.
Africans on Africa. Let's go.